So, if humans can live forever, what's the plan here? How are we going to prevent ourselves from reaching a population size where we are literally unable to sustain ourselves? Would we have to force everyone who gets immortality treatment to also get sterilized? Or would we choose plan B and just let everyone start wars with one another over their limited resources and control the population that way? The automobile. It will grant to human beings their conquest over time and space by virtue of its speed of forward motion. The entire overgrown apparatus of the railroad falls away, and in relative freedom, humanity has conquered time and space. So I know at this point you might be a little confused. You're thinking, I clicked on a video about immortality. What's going on here? Well, kids, we'll get to that. But first, I want to do a little story time. Once upon a time, during a period of history we call most of history, human beings didn't have the luxury of driving themselves from place to place. Instead, they had to walk around on their own 2 feet. But eventually, some genius disruptors changed the world. Now, like with most technologies, the automobile wasn't actually created by just one person. Rather, it was a culmination of centuries of innovation by intelligent and creative thinkers, some of whom invented one component of it, and some of whom maybe improved on a previous design. So like in 1680, some dude draws up plans for an internal combustion engine. In 1824, someone adapts a steam engine to burn gas. And in 1886, Carl Benz receives a patent for a gas-fueled car. Basically, while cars would go on to drastically and irrevocably change the world, that change didn't happen overnight. The first cars were awkward and clunky. They were just playthings for the rich. And between the late 19th century and World War I, driving was pretty much considered a leisurely pastime. But then, everything changed when the Fire Nation— But then, everything changed in the United States in the pre-World War I era, thanks to carmaker Henry Ford and his Model T. Henry produced his car on an assembly line. So basically, instead of all of the workers producing every car from scratch, each worker carried out one simple step of production on each car, over and over and over. This means Ford could hire low-skilled workers and train them quickly, and he could produce cars at a much faster rate than his competitors. And as a result, the Model T could be sold at a price point that made it accessible to most Americans. The result was that, while in 1900 there were only 8,000-ish vehicle owners in the United States, by 1920, there were 23 million registered American drivers. And once people own cars, they need a place to drive them. Roads were often too narrow and bumpy to accommodate automobiles, so cities had to widen them and pave them over. Suddenly, cities found themselves trapped in a darkly ironic cycle. The more roads they built, the easier it became to drive. So the more people bought cars. So the more roads they built. So the easier it became to drive. So the more people bought cars. So the more roads they built. You see the problem. And this led to a new phenomenon: suburban sprawl. Pre-automobile cities were centralized, with the majority of their civic function taking place in a large, easily accessible central area. But with cars, it became possible to live farther and farther away. And this is when suburbs began springing up. These were small communities on the outskirts of major cities that typically housed workers who commuted into the city with an automobile. And once again, municipal governments found themselves in a bind. They were building more roads so that people could live farther away, so they needed to build more roads to reach those people. Then those people could live even farther away, so they needed to build more roads so that more people could live farther away. Eventually, American cities began to look less like this and more like— In 1956, President Eisenhower signed the National Interstate and Defense Highways Act, which allocated $25 billion, or about $193 billion in today's money, for the creation of a national highway system. And because the highways needed to connect cities to suburbs, that usually meant they needed to be built right in the middle of the cities they served. The problem was, people already lived there. Therefore, existing neighborhoods were bulldozed and their residents relocated. Probably unsurprisingly, Black communities were disproportionately slated for destruction, including in Miami, where Interstate 95 was routed through Overtown, a Black neighborhood known as the Harlem of the South, rather than a nearby abandoned rail corridor. In St. Paul, Minnesota, where the builders of I-94 managed to displace 1 out of every 7 of the city's Black residents. Another unintended consequence of widespread car use is its devastating health consequences. Those living in a smog-filled city can expect to be breathing carbon monoxide, nitrogen and sulfur oxides, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter. As a result, living near a major road can increase the risk of asthma, cardiovascular disease, poor lung function, impaired lung development in children, preterm and low birth weight infants, and childhood leukemia. And then there's climate change. Vehicles contribute to the process of climate change through something known as the greenhouse effect. We also have to keep in mind that things like building roads and drilling for oil can cause significant damage to the ecosystems around them. You know what's funny? Because in my last video, I actually spoke about the passenger princess trend. It's this thing you see people saying on TikTok where their boyfriend is driving them around everywhere and they decorate their whole car with like pink glitter. In my last video, I basically talked about how I think that trend glamorizes codependence. I spoke about the importance of driving, how driving is essential to your freedom of movement, but ironically, that's kind of exactly the problem. Basically, we've found ourselves caught up in the same vicious cycle as urban planners of the past. We need cars to function in our cities, which means that we need to build our cities to be adapted to cars, which means that we need cars to function in our cities. So that's it, kids. That's the end of story time for today. The not so happily ever after tale of the automobile. A cautionary tale, if you will. So with that in mind, I really have to sit here and wonder, what the f makes humans think it's a good idea to try and live forever? Meet Bryan.
The one game we all humans play, every human on the planet is playing, is don't die.
Those are all the pills you take in one day.
111. My last meal of the day is at 11 a.m. and every calorie has to fight for its life. My left ear is 64, my heart is 37, my diaphragm strength is 18. I playfully say I'm trying to become like an 18-year-old. My son is 17, and so I always tease him and say, when I grow younger, I want to be like you. We've made about 22 years of progress in reversing the age of my skin. You get about 10 reports on pore size, UV spots, reds, browns. This is how you don't die.
Bryan Johnson is a 46-year-old multi-hundred millionaire who made a boatload of money founding a payment processing company that he eventually sold to PayPal. And now, Bryan is singularly focused on one goal: don't die. Bryan lives his entire life according to a self-developed algorithm he refers to as Blueprint, which is basically an extremely strict lifestyle that dictates his diet, his sleep, and his medication regimen in an attempt to reverse aging. This guy takes 111 medications and supplements, utilizes some of the same skincare products that I do to keep up his youthful glow, measures every, and I mean every, bodily function from his stools to his nightly boners. And all of this is being done supposedly with a team of doctors who are attempting to check whether or not his biological age, a term which they very loosely define, is being reversed. Bryan has attracted significant praise and attention from dedicated fans. Just take a look at some of the comments left on his YouTube channel. The dedication that you put into your work and research is astonishing and admirable. This guy is a gem, and what he is doing for the world should be appreciated. You're a beautiful person, Bryan. Thank you for making your research so accessible. One thing that really sticks out in these comments is how people are so sure that Bryan is making a significant contribution to scientific research and is giving the rest of us mere mortals the gift of sharing it for free. When I first got the idea to make a video based on his lifestyle, I actually thought I would make an entire video dedicated to explaining why his supposed research is actually really unscientific. But these days, for every single unscientific grift out there on social media, it seems like there are countless people willing to believe it unconditionally. So frankly, I thought a whole video about it would be a waste of my breath. I'm just gonna make a few brief points. First of all, the whole point of a scientific experiment is to keep all conditions as similar as possible, and to change just one little thing so you can measure the impact that that one thing has. Basically, if you just throw a bunch of shit at the wall and hope that something sticks, how will you know what worked? For example, an effective study on longevity might look something like this. You take a group of people who are otherwise living a very similar life. You randomly assign some of them to what we would call an experimental group, and you ask them to eat a sugar-free diet. And then the other group becomes the control group, which means that everything stays the same, and they would continue eating the standard Western diet. You might then follow them over the next couple of years, and then you want to see whether the sugar-free group collectively lives longer. This is a bit of a simplified explanation of what's known as a randomized control trial, which is a common type of study used to test new medical treatments. Studies require large groups of people, or sample sizes, so that scientists know that any changes they see are the result of the treatment that they implemented and not the result of any one individual's bodily makeup. There are some types of studies, like case studies, which may just focus on one person. However, these are usually meant to give us an understanding of what happens naturally and without intervention. An example of such a study might be psychologists examining how patients act during a paranoid delusion in order to get a better understanding of their symptoms. This doesn't mean that there isn't any potential value to Bryan's work. If by some miracle this dude lives 200 years, I do think it would be worthwhile at that point for researchers to test some of the various protocols he lives his life by. But while Bryan's blueprint could theoretically be the basis of future research, it is not in and of itself scientific research. And this only really scratches the surface of the pseudoscientific nature of Blueprint. For a more detailed explanation of Bryan's faulty science, I watched a pretty good video from a YouTuber named Leona Leonis. I will link that video below. Another thing that frustrates me about all the attention that Bryan is receiving is that I would argue he isn't really trying anything very radical or new. Pseudoscientific and even legitimately scientific anti-aging routines have probably existed in some capacity since the beginning of time. We have a 2,000-year-old Chinese emperor, not that the guy lived to be 2,000, but that he ruled about 2,000 years ago. And this guy spent his entire rule searching for a so-called elixir of life until he passed away at the age of 49. And then we have a 19th century French neurologist who claims to have rejuvenated himself, whatever that means, after injecting himself with a juice made from the testicles of guinea pigs and dogs before dying 5 years later. Basically, humans have been trying and failing to seek immortality for as long as they've existed. And both pseudoscientific and legitimately scientific anti-aging routines have always been especially popular with one particular group of people, except that when members of this group try them, we don't call them scientists, we mock them. And that group of people is pretty much every woman.
Metformin is the anti-aging pill that costs pennies.
I've actually trained my face not to move too much. It actually helped me. Like, I have no crow's feet.
Can I use heat and cold therapy to decrease my biological age?
The people who look extremely young for their age are taking nicotinamide mononucleotide.
Microneedling with exosomes. Exosomes contain tons of growth factors that increase your body's fibroblast production.
And I know people may be thinking, well, Bryan has a team of doctors involved. Bryan is measuring the effects of everything that he is doing. Yes, he's testing them all on his body, but it's not like people who are getting Botox are using some kind of an untested product and have no medical support whatsoever. Bryan is just taking it to a new extreme because he's lucky enough to have the time and financial resources to incorporate beauty and wellness techniques into literally every waking moment of his life. Bryan's supporters might also argue that the difference is that he's measuring every biological function. But again, with a sample size of 1, so many different variables, no control group to compare with, and no clear definition of what he means when he says biological age, the truth is those measurements just don't tell us much. All of this aside, I think the single most effective counter to Bryan's outlandish claim that he has somehow reversed his biological age is common sense. Just take a look at Bryan's appearance in this video from about 7 years ago, and then in this TikTok that he posted a few weeks ago. And then you tell me if this looks like a man who's aging in reverse. But while it's weird to see so many people writing epic poems extolling Bryan's greatness in the comments of his videos, I don't think that Bryan as an individual is actually that much of a problem. What worries me far more is the ideas that Bryan represents, and particularly how many people seem to uncritically accept that human immortality would inevitably be a good thing. Because even though I don't believe that Bryan will be the one to get us there, like with the bit-by-bit process that led to the car, over the next few centuries, one person may figure out how to stop the decline of neurons. One person may figure out how to stop collagen loss. And slowly over time, these developments will build on themselves until we have significantly expanded the human lifespan. And considering how much new technologies have led to widespread and often dangerous unintended consequences, it is absolutely insane to me that more people aren't trying to think through what the long-term consequences of a development as significant as human immortality would actually be. And for this reason, I think that rather than just uncritically praising Bryan, or even totally writing him off, I think we should actually grapple with the ideas that he's bringing to the table. So while I am in no way an expert in this issue, I do want to spend the rest of this video talking through what I think are some of the obvious questions we need to be asking before we prop up someone who's advocating for humans not to die. The most essential question that supporters of people like Bryan haven't answered yet is also the most obvious one. What will life be like with that many people on the planet? Currently, with our average human lifespan of 70 years, we already have a population of 8 billion that is growing exponentially, and there is clear evidence of the strain that this is putting on our planet. We can see this in the degradation of natural resources, such as our rainforests, at a faster rate than we can replace them. So, if humans can live forever, what's the plan here? How are we going to prevent ourselves from reaching a population size where we are literally unable to sustain ourselves? Would we have to force everyone who gets immortality treatment to also get sterilized? At what age would we allow someone to make that decision? How would we prevent people from obtaining this technology on the black market, living forever, and also having kids? Or would we choose plan B and just let everyone start wars with one another over their limited resources and control the population that way? The fact that the people who are spending millions of dollars in life extension technologies haven't thought through the answers to these extremely basic questions seems a little bit irresponsible, to say the least. If immortality technology were ever developed, I would argue that one of the most immediate and likely outcomes before population size even became an issue would be an extreme exacerbation of class differences. I mean, let's be real. It wouldn't be handed out to random passerby on the street like it's a pamphlet about accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, right? It would be available to the wealthy first. Already, we're living in a world where us normies are going on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and we're seeing some random billionaire's son or rich kid influencer flaunting their cars or their beauty product hauls or whatever material wealth they have. But if there was an unequal distribution of something as significant as death, I think it would legitimately cause chaos. Imagine if instead of watching someone's fake Architectural Digest home tour, you're now watching them live forever while you and your friends and your family grow old, get sick, and die. All of a sudden, one of the two great equalizers that all human beings share, the fact that death will eventually come for all of us, is eliminated. The only thing that will be left to comfort us as we watched our loved ones take their final breaths in some hospital bed somewhere will be that rich people poop too. And frankly, I'm not sure that's going to help much. I think a technology like this would likely exacerbate financial inequality as well. Currently, two of the richest people in the world are Elon Musk, who is worth about $254.7 billion, and Jeff Bezos, who is worth only a meager $175.6 billion. Depending on various economic factors, both men can easily become worth hundreds of millions more. on any given day. However, both men's earnings are kind of guaranteed to have a finite end because dead people can't earn money. But what if these men never died? What if they were able to accumulate the same amount of money and wealth and power that they're accumulating now with no end in sight, and to wield that power over the next 10 or 15 or 30 generations? Now, while I can't get into anyone's head and know for sure what they're thinking, based on the way people like Jeff Bezos conduct their companies, I think it's pretty clear that they already see normal workers as disposable.
This 16-page class action lawsuit filed yesterday in Denver. It alleges delivery drivers in Colorado are forced to urinate in bottles in the back of delivery vans, defecate in bags, and in many cases restrain themselves from using the bathroom.
So I have to imagine that if these guys accumulated infinite wealth and power and had the power of eternal life over their mortal employees, that they wouldn't be treating them with more kindness and benevolence. Interwoven with the class differences that such a technology could create is the possibility of exploitation that it would enable. Any kind of technology that could allow a body to live forever will almost inevitably be misused. Think of how many notoriously exploitative industries and entities, everything from sports to entertainment to the military, rely on the labor of young people. Most of these industries have had some form of a scandal that basically amounted to them performing medical interventions on minors in order to ensure their effective performance. Think of notorious incidents like the Russian Olympic figure skating team's doping allegations that nearly led to their 14-year-old star, Kamila Valieva, being banned from competition entirely. Or Hollywood golden age child actors like Judy Garland, who described the practices that studios use to get the most hours of work out of their young stars. She said, they'd give us pep pills, then they'd take us to the studio hospital and knock us cold with sleeping pills. After 4 hours, they'd wake us up and give us pep pills again. So what would happen if these industries realized that there was a way to ensure that their young workers could stay young and working forever? That doesn't sound like an eternal life that I would want to have forced on me. And then there's the matter of how this technology would work on a literal level. So there are 2 points from Bryan's blueprint that I want to highlight here. Bryan uploaded a video to his channel showing him experimenting with an anti-aging procedure that was a little concerning.
We have evaluated hundreds of longevity therapies, and I thought it would be pretty epic if my son, my father, and I completed the world's first multi-generational plasma exchange. And it started with this really wild experiment where 2 mice were actually sewn together to share the same circulatory system. It was an old mouse and a young mouse. The results showed that the old mouse got younger.
Bryan isn't making that up. Experiments have been conducted observing the effects of heterochronic parabosis, which is basically a fancy way for scientists to say that they sewed 2 mice together. Specifically, this process involves surgically connecting a younger and an older mouse so they share a circulatory system. The older mice would show improvements in their tissues and organs, while the younger mice would show signs of aging. There have also been studies which injected older mice with the blood plasma of younger mice, though it seems that this didn't lead to significant results. I imagine that this was the research Bryan was going off of when he decided to try his intergenerational plasma donation. And Bryan isn't the only one who's tried this.
Dr. Jesse Karmazin is talking about transfusions with the young blood from teenagers. That blood is going to patients over 35 as part of a clinical trial called Ambrosia, where subjects paid $8,000 to get the rich growth factors found in the platelets in blood's plasma.
So let's say it turns out that a procedure like this does in fact work. It should be plainly obvious that this would present significant ethical issues. Just a few questions I can think of. At what age would someone be considered old enough to consent to giving? Would their parents consent for them? How would you prevent a black market from arising where people younger than the age of consent are having their blood drawn? Could parents use blood from their own children? At what point does that become coercive? Does this need to be done under a doctor's supervision? How would we stop people from buying a syringe and an IV bag off of Amazon and just doing it in their living room anyway? How would we prevent harm from coming to children who are repeatedly having their blood drawn? Where would doctors draw the line for a safe level of unnecessary blood draws from young people? How do we prevent the development of exploitative markets where the bodies of the poor are exploited in service of the wealthy people's needs? The idea of any sort of technology being developed that relies on medical procedures being performed on young and vulnerable people in order to feed into the vanity of the wealthy is not the step forward for humanity that Bryan and his supporters seem to think it is. Really, it's our worst dystopian nightmare. The other area of Bryan's blueprint that I want to draw your attention to is his use of prescription medication.
This one is metformin. This is given typically to diabetics. It's been also taken off-label for longevity purposes.
It does seem like there is some scientific research indicating metformin's anti-aging potential. And while that could be an amazing thing if it turns out to be true, it does also raise certain ethical questions. Metformin is not an over-the-counter supplement. It's a prescription medication used to treat serious conditions. It's meant to improve the way that the body handles insulin. Therefore, it is mainly used to treat diabetes. Let's say a bunch of billionaires and celebrities realized that this drug could extend their youth, and they were willing to shell out exorbitant amounts of money to get access to it. This could easily lead to people who who depend on it to live healthy and productive lives being unable to compete. We've actually already seen this happen, and pretty recently too.
Leonie lives with type 2 diabetes. The disease was well controlled until about 18 months ago, when the medication she was on, Ozempic, became almost impossible to buy after getting a reputation as a dieting wonder drug. The 60-year-old was recently diagnosed with nerve damage. She believes the symptoms could have been prevented if she was still able to regularly take Ozempic.
To take an injection off somebody with a disease that's ill with this already, I can't grasp that. My life will be shortened, my quality of life will not be the same.
I have a feeling that if a life-saving prescription were found to help people stay younger for longer, we would only see the situation repeated again to a more extreme degree. Of all the difficult questions raised by the idea of human immortality, perhaps the most challenging one to answer would be the one that forces us to confront the way we are currently conducting our mortal existences. Because before people jump on board with the idea of living forever, they may do well to sit down and ask themselves, what would I actually do with my eternal life? The show The Good Place touches on this in a very interesting way. And spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen this show yet, I recommend skipping to the time code on the screen. The premise of this show is that when people die, they spend their afterlife in one of two places. They can go to the good place, which is for people who lived a moral life, or the bad place, which is for people who were immoral. Basically, this corresponds to heaven and hell. Throughout the show, we follow 4 people: Eleanor, Chidi, Tahani, and Jason, who all ended up in the bad place. Much of the plot centers around these characters trying to reach the good place before they finally make it in the show's penultimate episode. At first, our heroes are overjoyed by their new paradise. Residents of the good place can go anywhere and have anything. There are these green doors they walk through that can take them to Paris or to ancient Greek to debate with philosophers. Any material good they want can be summoned out of thin air, and they're surrounded by the best people who ever lived. Immediately, our heroes begin to take advantage of everything this new world has to offer. Jason has a lifelong dream:
racing go-karts with monkeys. Monkeys are the ideal go-kart opponents. They're funny enough to give the finger, but not smart enough to win.
So he sets off through a green door to make it a reality. And Chidi, a student of philosophy, geeks out at the opportunity to meet one of his biggest heroes, Hypatia of Alexandria, a real-life Greek philosopher portrayed by Lisa Kudrow. But something is off about Hypatia, known in the show as Patty. In real life, she was a world-renowned mathematician, but things are a bit different in her afterlife.
I studied so much things. Art and music and the one with the number piles, where I'd be like 2 and you'd be like 6.
Math?
Yes!
Basically, her mind has gone mushy, but she does have enough of her intellect left intact to explain what's going on.
On paper, this is paradise. All your desires and needs are met, but it's infinite. And when perfection goes on forever, you become this glassy-eyed mush person.
Moments later, Chidi and Eleanor bump into Jason, fresh off of his Tokyo Drift adventure. But to everyone's dismay, achieving his lifelong dream doesn't seem to have left Jason fulfilled.
Hey guys, I'm back. Go-karting with monkeys got boring really fast.
It did?
Oh, damn no.
As Patty puts it,
you get here and you realize that anything's possible and you do everything, and then you're done. But you still have infinity left.
And of course, the eternity portrayed in this show is a utopian one, where no one ever faces poverty or hunger or unhealthy relationships or family obligations. In a real-life eternity, it wouldn't be your happiness only that would drag on forever. It would also be your misery, or even just your life's daily mediocrity. And while you may think that with infinite time you could solve all your problems, I would argue that it could have a counterintuitive effect on your ability to self-improve. For example, starting a YouTube channel is hard work. Plus, it's kind of scary to put your name and your face and your creative passions out there for the world to see and potentially reject. What motivated me to do it anyway was that I didn't want to look back at the end of my life and realize I'd never pursued this dream I had and then wonder what might have happened if I had given it a try. The knowledge that I will eventually run out of time is kind of the fire under my ass that pushes me to work hard for things I want even when it feels like I can't. If that driving force was absent, there's a very real chance that I would just wake up each day motivated only to do what felt good in the moment, like eat shit food and sleep in. I'd probably still have to pay rent and stuff like that, so I'd probably just wind up waking up each day and slowly toiling my infinity away in a meaningless job. And there would be no motivation for me to put in that hard work necessary to change my situation in the present, because I would know that I could do it infinity days from now and still have infinity left to go. I don't know what the future will bring, but it does sometimes seem like we as a species are determined to bring about our own ruin through supposed advancement, and that nothing, not even this one video essay published on a channel with less than 20 subscribers, subscribers is gonna stop us. So while I don't think that Bryan Johnson's blueprint will change the world, I do think the day might come that it forces us to grapple with the questions that it raises. And while the realist in me doubts that this would go any differently from any of the other technologies that we have basically just released on the human population with no thoughts to the long-term consequences whatsoever, the idealist in me wants to ask these questions anyway, and hope that the people rushing to develop this new technology pause to think through some of their answers. So that's it. You've made it to the end of the video. Congratulations. If you like this kind of deep dive discussion into different current events and internet cultural moments, please like and subscribe to my channel. I plan to keep on doing more content like this in the future, and I would love to have you. You can even go wild and hit that notification button if you're feeling spicy. Thank you so much. Once again, my name is Roxanne Rose. I'll see you next time.